Good evening and welcome to Middle Age Baby Tonight. For more than a century, the American entertainment industry has exported our values to the rest of the world. Despite Hollywood always being seen as progressive, not all of their actions seem like it in the harsh light of 2023. For much of Hollywood's history, most non-white characters were cast with white actors, what's known as whitewashing. The result was that non-white actors missed an opportunity to be cast in these roles, and the public got a false portrayal of either the fictional source material or history. So we look back now and shake our heads, because that was wrong. And yet for more than a decade, there's been a push to do the opposite, to cast traditionally white characters or historical figures with non-white actors. At first glance, you may be tempted to think this too is wrong. Surely if this is considered bad, then so is this. Right? From nearly the beginning of film, non-white characters have been portrayed by white actors. I'm sure there are myriad reasons for why. For the sake of this video, I don't really care. It happened, I think it was wrong, and we're all a little worse off that it did, because it led to some otherwise classic movies being tainted by miscasting characters. This was true for both historical figures as well as fictional ones. Even more recently, there are high-profile examples of white actors being cast in traditionally non-white roles. In these more recent examples, I think the reasons are far more in line with the idea that studios were trying to cast bigger names to have the movie carried by an established star, especially when it came to IPs that the general public may have been less than familiar with. The move was based far more on economics than race. I mean, we're not talking about 1950 here. The idea that Hollywood would cast Scarlett Johansson as Major Motoko Kusanagi in the 2017 adaptation of the anime classic Ghost in the Shell out of racism instead of trying to capitalize on her marketability at that time is just silliness. Now, I happen to be one of those weirdos that thinks adaptations should remain as close to the source material as possible. This isn't about race for me, or sex, or sexual orientation when we're talking about swapping characters for those traits. For me, this is 100% about attempting to keep legacy characters as accurate as possible to the source material. It's usually most obvious when it's a race or sex swap, but it can really be anything. What activists fail to consider when they're screaming about racism and misogyny when nerdy fans complain about casting is that they're dealing with mostly lunatics who have argued over the minutia of their hobbies, whether it's been comic books or sci-fi fantasy novels, movies and TV shows, whatever, for decades. They know every detail of every aspect of their thing. The last thing they want to see is some studio asshat take their thing and alter it in some pathetic attempt to appeal to normies. Having said that, let me address two things right out of the gate. First, I am sick and tired of hearing people say that we fans shouldn't complain about these things because it's unimportant and none of it matters. It's just a movie about space wizards. It's just a movie about men in spandex. Why do you care? It's not like the race of the character matters, or their sex, or who they sleep with. Right. That's weird, because if these things were so unimportant and they mattered so little, why is it activists are so hell-bent on taking them over and altering them to their liking? When we complain, they start shrieking like a ring wraith. Surely if these things were so unimportant, they wouldn't be pushing so hard and defending their changes with such ferocity, right? If it's that important to change these things, how can it be unimportant to not want them changed? Like Andrew Breitbart once said, politics is downstream from culture. It is important, and they know it, which is why they want to take them and change them to their liking, whether it ruins the franchises or not. It's not about entertainment. It's about messaging. Secondly, let's stop with the bullshit suggestion that all of this is the result of a policy of blind casting, where the best actor gets hired for the role regardless of race, sex, etc. If that was true, how do we account for the various race and sex-swapped cartoon characters we've seen recently? Are we to believe there's some Roger Rabbit-style cartoon actor casting calls taking place, where the biggest names in animation roll right out of Toontown in hopes of landing that big role? Stop it. Get some help. Fans have always been gatekeepers for the franchises they love. Younger viewers may be unaware, but there was an initial pushback about Michael Keaton being Batman back in 1989. Keaton was mostly known for his roles in comedies like Night Shift, Mr. Mom, Gung Ho, Beetlejuice, and Dream Team. It was pretty well understood that Tim Burton was going to take Batman in a more Frank Miller direction than the last time we'd seen him on screen with Adam West in the 60s, so Keaton seemed like an odd choice. Plus, he's barely 5'9", so not exactly the towering presence we've come to expect from Batman. And even though he's now considered by many to be the best Batman we've had, I still think he was miscast. Don't get me wrong, I love Michael Keaton, just not for that role. Jump forward 20 years, and we had a pretty heated debate on the casting of the Joker in Nolan's The Dark Knight. Again, in retrospect, Heath Ledger's performance is now seen as legendary by most, but at the time, there was grousing about it. Last time we'd seen a live-action Joker, Jack Nicholson had played him, and Ledger wasn't Nicholson. Fans complained because it's what passionate fans do. I was actually on board with his casting because I thought I'd seen something in him in previous roles that would work there. On the other hand, I was never a fan of Christian Bale being cast as Batman. He's just not big enough for my taste at 5'11". Yeah, I know, I'm a picky asshole. What are you going to do? And just so you don't think all I care about are actors being tall, take Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. He's now seen as the definitive choice, but his casting is some of the worst ever, I think. Wolverine in the comics is 5'3". He's short, he's angry, he's aggressive. You know, like a Wolverine. His small stature is part of the character's charm and a huge part of what makes him who he is. Jackman is nearly a foot taller at 6'2", and while he got absolutely shredded for the role, he's just too tall. His height takes away the reason for Logan's Napoleon complex. The chip on his shoulder is removed by casting a taller actor. Casting tip for Marvel? Look at Jeremy Allen White from FX's The Bear, who at 5'7" would make a solid Wolverine in any upcoming X-Men movies. You're welcome. What about Superman? I'm not sure there's a more iconic character. His look is so iconic, people will say things like, "That guy looks like Superman," when seeing a random guy just walking down the street. Brandon Routh seemed like a no-brainer choice as the Man of Steel back in 2006, right? Yeah, actually, except for one flaw. Superman has blue eyes. Brandon Routh has brown eyes. So what did Warner Brothers do to make him more character accurate? They had him wear blue contacts. So in 2006, even though Routh was a dead ringer for Superman in almost every way, it was still important enough to have the actor wear uncomfortable contacts in order to get Superman's eye color correct. And no one seemed surprised because real fans would have caught the inaccuracy. If only Warner Brothers gave that much of a shit now. There were early complaints about Henry Cavill's costume and the lack of red outer underwear in Man of Steel. The first promotional photo released was of him hunched over at the door of a busted-up bank vault, sort of hiding his midsection. Is he wearing them? Is his blue that dark, or is it just a dark photo? What's with the weird texture all over it? Why is it gold inside the S logo and not yellow? After the release of Man of Steel, there were complaints about all of these. Well, those and Zack Snyder's complete lack of understanding of who Superman is as a character, but that's a whole nother video. Complaints around casting Wonder Woman revolved around Gal Gadot being built like a wayfish stick figure runway model with an overall lack of muscle and a lack of, huge tracts of land. Chris Hemsworth was too thin and not going to be right for Thor. Chris Evans wasn't serious enough to play Steve Rogers. And yeah, in retrospect, this all looks like a list of how wrong fans can be, and that may be correct, but it's not the point. The point is that none of this comes as any surprise to longtime sci-fi, fantasy, or comic fans. Nerdy fans have always complained about the tiniest things. They want consistency, they want accuracy, they want the lore of their franchises to be respected as much as they respect them. And despite the desire of activists to paint them as racist, misogynist, and various phobes, most of their complaints are simple issues of wanting to see the thing they loved represented on screen the way they've been written or drawn. That's it. They have nurtured and loved these arcane little subjects that normies have paid no attention to. So to then have them taken away by the same people that ignored them for decades and altered to appeal to that group that took them away is infuriating. For what it's worth, it's the same thing with sports movies. As a guy with a sports background, baseball specifically, it absolutely drives me insane to see guys cast in movies that have clearly never picked up a bat or even played catch. I'm looking directly at you, John Cusack. On the other hand, when a guy has obviously played, it allows for the knowledgeable audience member to sit back and accept them as the character, because they're not taken out of the movie because of how wrong it all looks. Someone with a clear love of the subject rings true to real fans. Authenticity matters, whether it's in a subtle movement or a historically accurate baseball cap or jersey, or that Superman's blue is the right shade. Normies won't notice or care, but passionate fans will, and they complain loudly when it's done wrong. It's why most complained about the horrendous casting of M. Night Shyamalan's shitty adaptation of one of the greatest cartoons of all time, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Race activists complained about it being whitewashed. Fans of the cartoon complained about it being inaccurate. They were seemingly arguing the same point, but they were definitely not on the same side. Activists don't care about accuracy across the board, just when it comes to casting non-white roles. Fans were being consistent here and proving that race was a non-factor for them. It's also why they cheered when the casting was released for the new adaptation being produced by Netflix. Not because it was chock full of diversity and had a cast full of Asian actors, but because the source material called for that kind of casting. And if you wanted to do it right, that's what you'd do. If the fans were the vile racists they're portrayed as when they complain, they should be up in arms over this casting and should have supported the previous version, but it's the exact opposite. It's almost like activists don't know what the fuck they're talking about and are only involved to cause trouble. It's why I'm so angry at the new double standard of black or brown washing characters today. It lays bare the real reasons for the complaints of the past, and they were not the complaints of fans, but of political activists. They were never really upset that these characters were being mistreated by the casting choices, just that white actors were playing non-white characters. It wasn't about the art, it was about politics. It's why there's no concern about the opposite happening now, and even arguments made for why it's a great thing. At its heart, this is just anti-racist horseshit in practice. Keep in mind, anti-racist does not mean not racist. That's a holdover from us Gen X people who grew up treating everyone the same, seeing color but not really giving a shit about it, looking at the content of a person's character instead of their skin color. You know, like that old racist Martin Luther King talked about. We're now told that race is the most important thing about a person. It's the first thing you should see, and all interactions should be affected by it. That's why black or brown washing characters is now seen as a good thing, because as Ibram X. Kendi, one of the masterminds behind this ridiculous movement, has stated, the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. Now, that just sounds like good old racism to me. In other words, it's not enough to recognize that bad things happened in the past and to be determined not to repeat those things today and in the future, otherwise known as learning from the past so as not to repeat it. Instead, we absolutely need to repeat the past, but in reverse this time, because that will somehow magically make the past better. It's just an open call for revenge, and that's bad enough. But it's calling for revenge against people who have done no harm to anyone, since most of the really egregious casting was done 60 plus years ago, and those people are long gone. What's next? Should we start digging up the old corpses of Hollywood producers and directors and salting and burning them Winchester style to make sure they're really gone? Like I've said, this is activism having taken over Hollywood. This has nothing to do with the desire to make the best movies or the most accurate portrayal of legacy characters. It's petty revenge masquerading as representation, and it's slowly eating away at entertainment like a cancer. Despite all that, no one has ever said having a nearly all non-white cast is an issue. Casting almost entirely black actors in Black Panther made perfect sense, obviously. Wakanda is, after all, a fictional country in Central Africa. Of course the inhabitants would be black. Had Disney actually made the cast diverse by having it look like New York in 2023, that would have been stupid. Of course, the same should have been true for Asgard. Odin, Thor, Loki, and the rest of the Asgardians were taken from Norse mythology after all. Rampant and uncontrolled immigration of those countries notwithstanding, the land of the Vikings is about as white as you're ever gonna get. As much as I like Idris Elba as an actor, it makes zero sense to cast him as Heimdall, or have the rest of Asgard look like a United Colors of Benetton ad from the 80s, just so you can avoid having a primarily white cast, even though the source material calls for it. This is where working on new stories from ethnically diverse regions would be a huge fix. I think everyone would like to see new stories, new characters, new heroes and villains from places we rarely see. Stop repurposing old stories which have always contained mostly white characters and mythology. Not only would this allow for the diversity these activists claim they want, but it would truly diversify cinema through the introduction of otherwise new stories and lore. It seems like a win-win. We don't get that though. As I said in my video titled Sequels, Prequels, Reboots, and Reimaginings, studios have little interest in taking chances on unknown properties and would rather jumpstart an older one that's already tried and tested because they're lazy as shit and because they're 100% on board with their idea of diversity. This ultimately means race, sex, orientation swapping legacy characters, which does nothing but piss off old longtime fans who just want accurate portrayals of their favorite stories. These swapped characters amount to little more than tokenizations. To keep this video as brief as possible, I'll just direct you to Eric July for a fully fleshed out definition of the term, and one that I fully agree with. Link is in the description. So instead of new stories, we get Black Spider-Man, Gay Spider-Man, Lady Thor, Lady Loki, Black Lady Iron Man, Black Anne Boleyn, Black Lady Viking Queens, Black Elves and Dwarves in Middle-earth, whatever the fuck Namor was supposed to be, Bi Superman, Black Batman, Indian self-insert Velma, and on and on and on. And all to garner favor with activists who rarely support their work outside of knighting for it on social media. If we've truly grown up as a society and come to grips with the idea that it's wrong to cast a historical or iconic character with an actor of the wrong race or sex the way it was when it was done in the past, when Hollywood seemed to whitewash everything, then that standard should be universal, especially if it's all about entertainment. It shouldn't be about race or sex, but about the accuracy of the source material. If you do that one thing, all complaints should vanish. And if activists are still complaining about representation after first telling them to piss off, then tell them to go picket movie studios and get them to write new, compelling stories we've never seen before, which feature the ethnically diverse cast you want, which we can all learn to love as much as we love the older ones we've all grown up with. And when they do that, actually spend money on supporting them rather than simply tweeting about it. For once, fix a problem with an actual solution that works for everyone instead of just ruining things. Or don't. I'm not the boss of you.